Okay, so we looked at the backswing position and the lockout position. Now we're going to look at how we actually sequence the movement pattern from the backswing to the lockout position. Basically, how do we actually make the kettlebell swing the kettlebell swing? So Christine's going to demonstrate about 5 or 6 good 2-arm kettlebell swings, and you're just going to notice the movement in the sequence that we're going to talk about. Go ahead, Christine. Great. All right, what you should have noticed is that the backswing position looks exactly like what we just covered. And the lockout looks basically like what we just covered, but then there's little details we talked about, that 45 to 90 degree hip flexion angle, the knee angle, not too far over the toes, the lockout of the quadriceps and glutes, the abdominals tight, the belt projection straight forward. All right, so we're just going to talk a little bit about the upswing and how we sequenced that, how we got there in the upswing position. So most importantly, what you should have noticed is as she came out of her backswing position, that the propulsion, the force production of the kettlebell swing is done with the glutes and the quadriceps with simultaneous hip and knee extension. Go ahead and do simultaneous hip and knee extension. That is where the production of force occurs to move the kettlebell out. It does not come from the arms. It comes from the hip and knee extension being very explosive, which means you have to have a very good, proper position in the backswing just to be able to get the glutes to load properly, the hamstrings to load properly, and the quads to load properly. That's why we went over the backswing earlier. So she gets that production of force from hip and knee extension at the same time. That's what catapults the bell forward. The arms just go along for the ride. Next piece of that is that the force that you produce in your hips and legs has to transfer from here and end up projecting out there. So as it transfers, you have to make sure that you're not taking energy through spinal extension, through leaning back. We want the energy that you produced in the legs to transfer right through the abdominals, right through the spine, and that's only going to occur if we get the proper alignment of the spine. We have to have very good alignment here. The abdominals bracing is what's going to allow that energy to transfer and come out the arms. Okay? Notice that you hear that sound each time she does a kettlebell swing. That helps to produce more tension. That's called power breathing. And that power breath allows the abdominals and obliques to engage even harder to get more bracing and less energy leaking back and more drive and transfer of the force forward out the arms. The final piece is that you look at the arms, we have force production, we have force transfer, and then we transfer that force right out the arms, and that is called force direction or force projection. And we want to produce the force and have it project into the bell in directly the same direction as the hips were driving. So we started in the kettlebell swing with the hips here, and she was driving through hip extension and knee extension. As she does that, that's going to create force going that way. We want to direct that force through the abdomen directly out that way. That's why the bell swing should finish somewhere out in this general area, 45 to 90 degrees, not overhead. When people start going overhead, they tend to pull on it with their arms and hyperextend. If we want to direct force overhead, we're going to do a technique called the kettlebell snatch to direct force overhead. It's a much more efficient way of getting a bell overhead than swinging it overhead. The kettlebell swing is much more designed for force production horizontally, so we want to then direct out the arms horizontally. So now we're going to have Christine do 5, 6 swings again, going back through in your mind now those details of hip extension, knee extension to produce the force, good pelvis to rib cage alignment with bracing of the abdominals with the power breath to transfer the force, and then continuing that force of direction horizontally through nice straight elbows and arms and wrists, forming a nice extension out. Look for that now in these next 5 to 6. See that sequence. It's a sequence that the body has to go through. Go ahead. 5 to 6 good ones. Notice the knee and hip extension, the bracing of the abdomen right behind that, and then the bell and the force transfers right through the bell, right out the arms. All the energy's in the legs. That whole sequencing, we call that kinetic linking. We're basically linking together the segments of the body. The hips and knees, they link together through the torso. We link to the torso and then out the arms. We link up our bodies in this way, and that helps us move very efficiently, very powerfully, and very athletically. That's called kinetic linking. So we talked about the kinetic linking and the sequence of the upswing and how we drive and propel the bell forward. Now we're going to talk about the backswing and how to sequence it coming back down. So when Christine does her swings, you notice the bell pops up off of the hips and knees. We can link up through the torso and transfer that energy out to the bell. The bell has a certain amount of force that's been projected onto it. Gravity is going to slow it down, and it's going to float for a second. After it floats for a second, it's going to start to, gravity's going to act on it, it's going to start to drop back down. At that point that it starts to drop back down, we're not going to move the body at all. We're going to keep the body in its locked out position, allow the bell to drop down, and then right when the arm starts to approach the rib cage, right about here, that's when she's going to start the hip hinge. And she's going to start to create a little extra acceleration, purposeful acceleration on the bell to throw it not down, but to help the bell accelerate back. Why back? Because we want to end up back into hip flexion. We want the bell to be coming back here. We want to send the energy back there, behind her, so that it loads through the posterior chain. If we were to send the bell down or just let the bell drop, it will tend to pull her straight down to the ground. She will usually, because she's so good, she's not going to do that, but she knows that typically it's going to pull her down into her legs, into her quads, and her knee angle's going to get off. And the whole sequence is going to get broken up. Can't really accelerate the bell very well when it's flying down here real low below the knee. So we want to think, wait for the bell to finish its flow. Let it finish, let it finish, let it finish. When it gets to about rib cage, that's going to be the trigger. When your arms get to about rib cage, the trigger to start sending the bell back underneath the hips. That's a proper sequence. That's the sequencing that people mostly miss. Come on back up out of that, Christine. They typically get to here, and they start to accelerate their hips back way too early, and the bell goes down below the knee. We want the arms to pass above the knee. A colleague of mine, several colleagues of mine, but most recently I heard it from Elaine Ross, when we turn forward, face forward, we want to think of the triangle that runs between the knees. We draw a straight line across the knees and up to the crotch. The point, we want to send the hands right between that triangle right there. That's the placement that we want to send the bell through. And if we don't stay upright and wait for the bell to come down to at least here before we start to accelerate back, the bell will go way below. So we have to wait at the top, let the arms come down first to here, then that triggers us to go back. Again, looking at that from the side is one of the more complex parts of the kettlebell swing. Turning to the side. When the arms are up, she's finished her swing in the lockout. To accelerate it back down, we're going to wait for the bell to finish its flow. It's going to drop, the arms are going to come down and hit the rib cage. That's going to be our trigger to actually accelerate the bell back under us. We're going to throw the arms back and do that through the lats. And accelerate that through a nice stable spine. And into the glutes. That load is going to eccentrically load right here into the glutes and hamstrings. That force that she sent down the bell is going to load right here into the glutes and hamstrings. That's going to provide a lot of loading to these muscles back here that they are then going to use to reproduce the propulsion and the force back up. And that's going to give us our nice sequenced kettlebell swing. And now you're going to see that and look for that. You're going to look for her to let it finish loading, let it drop, and then only when it gets to the rib cage will she then accelerate it right under the hips, above the knee. So now Christine's going to do a few swings again, and now we're going to look at that sequence of the backswing. Notice how she'll wait till the bell finishes its flow, and then the bell will start to drop, and only when the arm hits the rib cage will that trigger her to throw the bell back under the hips, as far back as possible. That's what we're going to look for. And you're going to see how that really loads the posterior chain really well and gives her the eccentric load right here to the glutes and hamstrings for her to use that eccentric load and propel it back forward and produce force really, really efficiently with her glutes and her quads. Okay? So, Christine, go ahead and do a few swings, and we'll look for that technique. We'll look for that sequence. Great. Notice how the bell floats, and it starts to drop, and then she accelerates at the last second. Her hips move. The last second. We wait for the bell first. She pushes the bell down. She throws it back under the hips. And notice how that blows the posterior chain. And she uses that energy, that stored elastic energy, to shoot it back forward. And drop. Very good.